One of the biggest lies propagated by Trump and other China hawks is that China stole jobs from the United States, that China has competed unfairly to do well economically. The reality is that American companies have benefited from working in China. They've been able to get bigger profits, such as companies like Apple or Nike, by outsourcing all of their manufacturing to China. But second, the American people have done well. They've been able to buy refrigerators. They've been able to buy phones, computers at a much cheaper rate than they would have in the United States if manufacturing was still done there. Now, one of the big concerns people have is they say that Americans have lost jobs because they've shipped all of these factory jobs over to China. Now, in some ways, that's true. And in the late 90s and in early 2000s, after China entered the WTO, there was some economic dislocation. And a lot of the manufacturing heartland of the United States was crippled. But here's the reality. The younger generations, the new people, have already found new jobs. You're already seeing Trump touting that it's the lowest unemployment numbers in the history of the world. So it's not like there's mass unemployment in the United States. It's actually quite easy to get a job. One of the bigger issues actually facing America right now is there aren't enough workers, which is why Trump has said, well, maybe we need to not deport migrant illegal workers who are in hospitality or who are in F&B or who are in cleaning. Because the reality is that there's been good job creation in the United States over the last 20 years outside of manufacturing. And I don't think that Americans want to be making shoes. They don't want to be making t-shirts. This is very low-end jobs. And I also take umbrage when people say that the Cambodians or the Chinese are stealing. If you go to any of these workers, they're not rich. Let me use Cambodia as an example. The last time I went to Cambodia, I visited some homes. They didn't have electricity. They didn't have floors. They actually had dirt on the floors. So these are people who are living a mouth-to-mouth existence, and they're making $200 US a month, making the Nike shoes, making the Gap t-shirts that Americans like to consume. They are not getting rich off of making these products, but American companies are benefiting. The American consumer is benefiting. Now, if you want to criticize anyone, you can criticize the oligarchs in the United States, these wealthy people who shipped all of these jobs to China, Cambodia, and Vietnam. It wasn't stolen by these countries. It was that China set up an efficient labor force, incredible infrastructure, and a great tax incentive legal system. And so they were able to outcompete America on manufacturing rather than stealing anything. We need to stop using words like steal or economic coercion. If you want to criticize anybody, it really should be the American oligarchs as well as their toadies in government. You can look at someone like Hillary Clinton, the former Secretary of State and Senator and spouse of Bill Clinton, the former president. Hillary Clinton was actually on the board of Walmart in the late 90s and really pushed for Walmart to embrace outsourcing all to China. So instead of criticizing and abusing poor little factory workers who are making $100, $200 a month who can barely put electricity on in their house, you should be taking aim at the wealthy oligarchs who benefited from the outsourcing, as well as people like Hillary Clinton. The blame should be laid on their doorstep. But frankly, I actually don't want to blame the oligarchs that much because, again, the people of America, the companies all benefited from this free trade and outsourcing to China. Now, why has China risen so strong since I first moved here in 1997? When you go to the infrastructure, it's absolutely incredible. Let me give you an example. I was recently in Tibet where I met with a 42-year-old Tibetan who was a party secretary of his village. He told me that 5 years ago, it would take 48 hours to drive from Lhasa to his village. 48 hours. I drove it in 45 minutes. And that's because the Chinese government has built up incredible infrastructure, even all the way up to 4,500 meters above the sea for this village in Tibet. Now, what this party secretary and his fellow villagers have done is they've built up a hot spring hotel. So they've been attracting all the Han Chinese tourists who no longer want to go to America, who no longer want to go to Paris, and now they want to see China's natural beauty by staying at this hot spring hotel. What this village also is doing is using live streaming on Taobao or Douyin, which is the Chinese name for TikTok, or Pinduoduo, and they're selling their peaches, their walnuts, and incense from the village around the world. So China, over the last 20 years since it's entered the WTO, has taken its profits and reinvested it in efficiency, in infrastructure, and helping enrich the everyday people in China. The United States, on the other hand, has invested all of their profits into war. We now have over 800 military bases in over 80 countries. We've lost trillions of dollars in Afghanistan, trillions of dollars in Iraq. We are wasting all of our money, all of our tax dollars on war while our schools, our roads, and our hospitals in America are crumbling. I fear for the American people. I fear for my fellow Americans because the oligarchs are profiting off war. The politicians are profiting off war, while everyday Americans are getting hurt by all of this wasted spending. Instead, we should take direction or learn from China and invest our profits into education, into hospitals, and very importantly, into infrastructure. Sometimes people ask me, you're American, you love America, why do you still live in China? Why do you live in a country where, let's be honest, there is censorship on the internet? One of the major reasons why I like living in China is because it's so safe. If my son wants to walk outside in downtown Shanghai at 2 a.m., I'm totally fine with that. I wouldn't let him do that in major cities like New York or San Francisco or Boston. I'm scared to walk outside around the Tenderloin district in San Francisco because of all of the violence and the crime. The United States and their politicians, or our politicians, need to stop blaming all of our problems on China, lost jobs, lost money, and start looking within. Our problems are derived from our own inability to invest in the American people. We spend way too much money warmongering outside of the United States.